Well, hello again. Whatever day it is, happy day to you. Today it's a Tuesday for me, another wonderful snowy day here in Rochester. I just love it. I am a winter. I don't care what anybody says. I think winter is all that and then some. Anyhow, welcome to my little observational electric gas series, Coffee Table Chats. Thank you to Captioning Services always. I never like to forget you. You do so much for so many of us, and I do appreciate it. And so today I thought I would bring to you a subject, important subject. They're all important subjects, but something we don't think much about because we don't have to. You see, I have a little picture today right up here on the screen for you of one of my favorite places in the world, the bookstore. Now, I have to say, I love every bookstore. I've never met a bookstore I didn't like. I like the bookstores at the library where they want to make some money to buy some things for programs for kids and or adults. I like those bookstores. I like the bookstores when communities have a community garage sale. I call that a pop-up bookstore. I love the bookstore. I love a formalized bookstore, whether it's an independent bookstore, a chain bookstore. I get excited when I see books, magazines, periodicals, journals, anything in the grocery store. I love it. I love it. But I'm thinking to myself, Shakespeare's time, time of Aesop, time of fairy tales, etc. Really, right up until really the 1930s and 40s, most people in the United States, I can talk about other countries too. I've been to Greece, I've been to Turkey, I've been to Cuba, been to Great Britain. Many other countries till this day really don't have formal access to many books. Many years ago, certainly Mark Twain era, books were very expensive, hand quilled, hand printed. Paper costs an awful lot of money. The time it took in labor to put together an article, a periodical, the cost, the expense. Families, I was just talking to my husband. My husband is 66 years old. I said to him, I said, how many books do you have in your house? He was one of five kids. His mother was dental hygienist, so obviously she had interfaced with quite a bit of text, having gone to college. But his father was dairy farmer, and they really didn't interface with very much other than maybe the phone book or the Sears catalog or things of that nature, mundane, necessary items, but nothing extravagant, extraordinary. And he said there were just, a few books, not many. And I was thinking about my household. We had a phone book, we had a dictionary, and that was about it. Any materials that I brought into the house came from the library, and we really didn't have any money for books. It was just something culturally, societally, that the middle class family really just didn't buy in the 1960s and 70s. It became popularized to have all kinds of media, books, posters, cassette tapes, etc., into the house when the schools in the United States started bringing in scholastic book festivals. And that was sort of a new dynamic. The idea that you would bring a little bit of money to school, you would spend some money at school, you would pick a book. It was very exciting. Pick a book and it was yours to keep. And very often in my little circle of friends, because we can't just rely on my memory and my experience or my husband's or other cohorts, but I remember my peers also didn't have books. We all lived in relatively small apartments and we had very working class parents. I don't really remember many of my peers having professional parents. They were working class, work garment district. They worked in cafeterias, they worked in hospitals as, paraprofessionals, people that were in extreme supporting roles. So I don't really remember seeing books at my neighbors' homes. I'm just giving you this observation. I think about Shakespeare's time, these other period pieces that we have been looking at in our readings, how it really must have been so amazing to have a library in the house, to be able to afford all these materials and to have them and to keep them, not have to resell them. This industry became such a huge industry. I was looking at books for this class, and like I said to you before in the very beginning, there really is no book for this class. I mean, I could have made something do, but you would have to have spent over $100 for something that really wasn't, answering the questions that we're asking. The purpose of literature, why literature? Why does it make any sense? Why do we even keep discussing it? What are these topics that resonate with us? And then, of course, all these theories. We can do this together really at no cost, just costs a little more time for me. That's okay. I love it. Very committed to the subject. But books became very expensive. I remember a time in the 1990s, we would buy these cassettes on tape. We'd buy book club. Could be 12, $14 a month. Today, in those terms, that could be about 35, $45 a month. A lot of people like myself at that time that I work with really didn't have expendable resources when they had children in the house to spend maybe a week's worth of groceries on books. Look at it in today's economic system. Say if I spend $150 to $200 a week on groceries for my household today, I really don't have that to spend on books and media materials monthly. It just doesn't, it's not feasible. I'd like to, but I don't have it. I have other needs. But see, here today, we've been so blessed in the last 20 years with Google, all these search engines. I mean, think about it. In the middle of the night, say if I can't sleep or if I'm bored, I can hop onto these search engines. I can download all kinds of media, stream all kinds of articles, film, etc., at no cost, just the basic cost of internet and having that ability in the home, right? So easy. We just didn't have all of this. Even 15 years, things have changed so greatly. The access to information to enjoy things. But I think often about how all of this little brief discussion I'm offering you today in observation, is also about social class. We know in so many countries, including ours, especially in the period of slavery here in this country, it was illegal for certain members of our communities to learn how to read. It was illegal for them to possess reading materials. It was illegal to dialogue about any written work. In many other countries, it was the same scenario. Particular citizens did not share the same right educationally because, as we know, the moment people begin to read and they know things, they can be viewed as dangerous, right? The more danger, the better for me. But you know what I mean? The idea that it's an extension of social class, Shakespeare's time when people could afford, upper nobility could afford to go to plays. Even today, I think about the price of some of these tickets. I work with a lot of people that are, I would say, reentry people. I talk about criminal justice a lot in the rest of my life, not really very much in this class. But I work with many people that here in Rochester, their annual income is below the national average. So that means there really isn't a lot of money for Scholastic Book Festival. There isn't a lot of money to go to shows. I remember as a kid myself, I living in New York City, here everything was so close, but yet so far. In geography, Lincoln Center wasn't even 2 miles away from where I lived with my family, but I think I'd gone once as a young adult. We just didn't have the money. I wanted to see, I remember this wonderful, wonderful operetta called The Mikado, and I love Mikado, Mikado. And it really resonated with me, Mikado. I remember I wanted to see Mikado, and it really would have been 2 weeks worth of groceries for me to ask my family to buy the ticket. Now, here I can watch for free all kinds of productions of Mikado. Believe me, I have. I can see all kinds of productions of all kinds of plays that I could never afford. And this is what's so important, accessibility, and that's what we have today. We have all of this wonderful accessibility that we can get our hands on the materials, that if we want to hear music, see the lyrics, we can get our hands on it. We don't have to have the money to buy an album. We don't have to hope that the radio plays it and that we catch it at that moment. We have this ability to stop, rewind, pause, play. Back in my day, we really didn't have all this ability. If you missed it, you just didn't see it. If you didn't have the money, you just didn't see it. I think to myself, an opportunity in understanding life, the arts, expression, people, humanity, the world of work, how it must have been such a dark period of time for many centuries when people really had to rely on working maybe 2, 3, 4 months to afford a ticket to see a play or a production or a book, you know? Here today, I mean, I go to the library maybe 4 or 5 times a week, physically go. I love to see the books. I love to see all of the material. I love to see what's new. I love to see what other people are reading. When they set up the little end caps with all of their new materials, I get so excited. Because when we're reading, when we're listening, when we're interacting with somebody else's ideas, I mean, I can speak for probably most English majors, we get this opportunity to see a whole other world right in front of us. Really so exciting. So I would like you to think about that, to give pause, that the stories become sometimes, if we look at it, very important. I can imagine maybe 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, that a person and a child and an adult, any kind of person would read something and then everybody else would be reliant upon him, her, they recanting what they read because they didn't have access first person to the text. Can you imagine? Didn't have access. No ability to get it, no ability to hold it, no ability to see it, smell it, experience it. But then again, I think to myself, look at all these museums online, right? Form of literary cultural studies. We're able to see all kinds of wonderful things online, go to museums I'm never going to physically go to, and have these experiences. If you had told me 20 years ago, okay, 20 years ago, if you told me in 2005 that I would have experienced all these museums online, without ever leaving the comfort of my living room, I would have said, "Oh, please, what are you talking about? Sounds so Orwellian, what are you talking about?" But it's obviously true that I can transport myself on a day like today, beautiful winter day. I love to camp. I can go outside with my phone, stand in the middle of the snow coming in every direction, watch all the birds fly over me with a hot cup of cocoa, and I can still see the Mikado today on the phone. I can still see Romeo and Juliet, several productions. I can have people read to me on video. I can have people read to me on audio. I can do all kinds of things. I can take museum trips. I can see all kinds of things that I don't necessarily have to have the time, the transportation, or the money to do. This made our world rich. I think about special populations, people with ID and DD, that would be intellectual disability and or persons with developmental disability. For many years in our educational system, I know this firsthand. I not only worked in these systems, I also taught in these systems. I wrote curriculum for these systems. I wrote grants for these systems. And the love of my life, my youngest son, Sergey, happens to have some circumstances with his not capacity, but his ability to process. Anyway, he's magnificent. Anyway, just I think to myself how in facilities for so many years there was never a library. You know, we would say that the ID, DD persons didn't need to have any kind of relationship with these materials, and we didn't really provide access to these materials. I think often the people that were in psychiatric asylum, the people that in our culture that were also in correctional facilities, we can extend that to rehabilitative facilities, drug and alcohol, that spent an awful lot of time in facilities, never being able to access really books, materials, shows, museums, because the idea was counter. The idea was to sequester populations that we just didn't feel fit, in the realm of everyday schematic, or we felt there was no room for everyday schematic, or in some cases, there were just not enough staff and budgetary to take people out in schematic. And I have to say, that in the world of literature, we say, why is it important, right? Why are these topics important? The method in which people get it is important because there are facilities today, they're all over Rochester, all over the place, globally as well, where people, no matter what their status, situation, station, capacity, they do have access to materials. They do have ability to have the same experiences you and I are having. I remember when I was in college many years ago, I didn't have the money to travel overseas as I wished I did. I had many cohorts that we would be able to put the money together. They'd go to Ireland, they'd study in England. They had all these study abroad places. Both my children, Tabitha and TJ, I've talked about them before to you, shared with you. They both went places. I was so pleased that they did. And they learned different things and stayed with people, cultural aspects of places. And here I can still do the same things. Granted, I don't have the plane ride. I don't have a lot of that be right there kind of experience, but I still am able to be in live productions, live time with other people in other places, have shared experiences. And I remember when I was in college and people would say, well, it's just not the same thing. Well, of course it's not the same thing. But you want to know something? It's certainly better than nothing. Think about the children in Cuba, not Cuba, New York, Cuba, the country. I think about them often, how they really don't have any opportunity to get online other than what the government pre-approves. Same thing in Haiti, uh, unless the government pre-approves and or the infrastructure is there. There are sometimes in Cuba, Haiti, there are these brownout power situations where there are power diets and people can't access particular uh, aspects of getting power, internet, whatever, at the same time and same day every day. We're really very fortunate. We don't think of it very often. But, I think of these other children in other countries, they aren't going to see these museums. They aren't going to see these productions. How fortunate are we? You know, when I was young, I would think to myself, oh, I'm bored. And I would put on my shoes and I would leave my little midtown apartment as a child. I walked down the library. Nobody had to wonder where I was. I was always in the library. And I would go down there. I'd sit there for hours, really hours. It was just such a safe place, a safe space. I didn't have to deal with the crazy going on in my house. There was a lot of crazy there. And it was just so nice for me to be able to look at subjects, look at art books, etc. So many of these countries in very rural places and spaces, they don't have library. They don't have magazine. We think of these cosmopolitan areas, at least I do, and I say, oh, everybody has this. No, everybody doesn't have this. No. During COVID, I was so bored to death. But I humor myself quickly. I decided to take some courses online at ETSU, Eastern Tennessee State University online. And they had this wonderful course called Appalachia Studies. Appalachia is a region, runs through a tip of New York State all the way down to Georgia. A lot of people walk it. They take like a 6-month hiatus. I'm not that person. I'm not going to walk it for 6 months. But I have been to little parts of the Appalachia region in my lifetime through different states, visiting, etc. Beautiful, very mountainous, really beautiful. A lot of hollows, a lot of cavernous spaces, a lot of mountains, really beautiful. You should look it up sometime if you're ever interested. An Appalachia region today, on a day like today, here we're all sitting around. I assume you're sitting around or listening to me while you're doing something else. There are places in Appalachia region, you know, Kentucky, West Virginia, parts of Pennsylvania, where there is nothing. There's just miles and miles of bucolic, rural, scenery. And getting an access to book or books, materials is almost impossible. For a long time, 1960s, 1970s, there was a big movement to bring books to different neighborhoods through, these rural opportunities. We had quite a few of them here in New York State, but it soon became obvious that the ability to get materials was really also part of a larger issue. It also became the ability to get other goods and services, you know, that certainly the more money, the more exposure, the more urbanization one had, the more ability persons had to procure these items when I was in graduate school here at SUNY Brockport, which about 25 miles away from RIT. I had had a little internship at a Native American Indian reservation. Today, we don't really say Native American, but sometimes we say First Nation persons or we say territory persons. So that's what we call it today here. So I had this internship, and I remember the kids really had no books. We would bring them these books that I would get at these garage sales, or I would have book drives. People would donate some used pre-enjoyed books. If they had a couple dollars, they'd buy some books, even at Dollar Tree, all kinds of books you could find there too. I bring these books, and the kids spent more time having me convince them that they could keep the books, more time convincing them than discussing the text in the books. That's how much disbelief they were in that they could keep these books, you know? So it's just something really to think about, the accessibility. How much different would people's lives have been Shakespeare era, Geoffrey Chaucer, with Thoreau? I think of Henry David Thoreau often sitting around his little lake house, his cottage, and writing all of his philosophical uh, ideas on paper for us, the existentialism. I think about, I used to love Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was one of the very first writers I ever really felt was speaking to me. He wrote this wonderful piece called Experience. Most people overlook it. I don't know why. But I guess maybe because it has a little bit of a sophisticated voice to it. He wrote this piece, Experience, after the death of his 5-year-old son, which affected him greatly, as you can imagine. It would affect anybody greatly. And he felt this sense of isolationism and just great grief and sadness, which, I mean, what an icky subject, I get it. But he really spoke to me, resonated with me, how people try to survive, their worst moments, their greatest disappointments. Think about that. I think often about the writers that have spoken to me, Salinger, Catcher in the Rye. I've read Catcher in the Rye probably about, 40 times in my life. I read it as a teen. I read it as a young adult. I read it as a married person. I read it a few times in formalized graduate school. I read it along with students that I assigned the text to. I read it as a parent. So you see, I read it through many voices and visions. I read it from many different perspectives because as I continued to grow, my perspectives continued to grow. We don't always have to see ourselves, our experience, self-referential as the same. We really can't. Think about other authors. Some of you might remember Judy Blume, really an exceptional author. She wrote like the Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, translated in over 80 languages. She wrote Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. She wrote Deanie. She wrote the book Forever. She wrote from the perspective of what it feels like to be a young boy or young girl. We could argue today to be a young person, but she does talk about menstruation and some of these exceptional situations. I don't mean to embarrass anybody. She talks about the idea of, what it's like to be a boy or a male and face erection for the very first time. Do people see this kind of physicality? What do I do if I'm in school? She addresses all of these things: menstruation, sexuality, the first sexual experience. of a female, and she does it so poignantly. And for many, many decades, her books meant so much to people because they were continuous conversations, especially as it had to do with sex, that people really couldn't have at that time and place in their homes with their parents. Not everybody has that relationship. Certainly back in my day, back to that day again. And people subsequent, my daughter's time, she's in her 30s, my son TJ, there was no internet. We didn't have all of this access to information to talk about sexuality, to learn about erection, menstruation, uh, to learn about miscarriages, how to handle different kinds of symptomatology through STDs, all the things that people keep looking up because they're trying to access information. I think about AIDS often, AIDS, HIV. When I was in college, it started to rear its ugly head, sexually transmitted diseases. Before that, I really never heard of STDs much. I never really heard about much in the mainstream. But then AIDS came along. We probably would have fared a lot better as a society if we only had the technology we have today to really have these insightful conversations that mean so much to so many people that really could have been, a different outcome in life or death, understanding myth versus fact. That's sometimes what the internet can do for us if we pay attention to the source, to sort out myth versus fact. Again, that's self-referential. What would I do if that were me? Learning as we go through these lessons, I don't have to go through it firsthand. I can certainly read somebody else's experience and say, oh, I gleaned enough from that. I don't think I'll be doing this, that, and the third. We could do that. So I just wanted to give you these ideas today. How when you go to a book, how luxurious, how luxurious. I include with that comic books. I include with that any illustrative magazine, journal, article, compendium of work. I include with that any kind of library of sight, sound, plays, music, how luxurious that we can just, have all these options to access materials. We can go places, read things, have shared experience. Just how our world has so much more adventure, has so much more, I'll use a word, agency over our own choices, over our own lives, academy. I want to use that word specifically, that we have academy. We have ability to formulate our own personal library. Like I hear my son Sergey, he just really always amazes me. And he puts together these wonderful playlists, or very often he and I talk about character development in film, and we talk about places in film. And he has these playlists. One of my hobbies over the past several years, just because I get homesick every now and then to go home to New York City, I wish I could go more often than I do. But I love to collect films, right? View film and collect the title after I've watched it. And lists of all these places where New York City is the backdrop. It can be any of the boroughs. And so I find that so comforting that I have my own little academy. I have agency over my own topic. And I love to collect pieces, whether it's poems that reference any aspect of New York City. I love photography. I love any kind of music that talks about New York City. Rolling Stones talks about New York City. David Bowie. All these different influences have their niche and some kind of commentary in music and the arts in New York City. I love to study architecture as it relates to New York City, the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building. I didn't live far. These places were in my backyard, the late Twin Towers. I think of that. Junior high school. They were building Twin Towers when I was in junior high. And we used to go on these field trips just from the outside, just to see the evolution of these buildings, you know? And here today, I can study whatever I'd like. I can build my own academy, my own little people's university. Ben Franklin, I think, was the one that said that the library is really the people's university. But you know what? These search engines, in defense of the search engines and information technology, I can build my own little library and study, you know, technology, study architecture. I can study the blueprints that are online, you know? So we say why? Why is literature important? Why? How? What does this have to do with our everyday lives? The aesthetic has plenty to do with our everyday lives, you know? So I'll leave you with those thoughts. I always like to say I'm not right, I'm not wrong, just making some observations for you to defend. I feel defensive today. To defend why it is that we look for literature, how it is that enables our life not only as escape, diversion, joy, but new lessons, new ways of understanding people, places, and things, to be well read. What does it really mean to be educated? I could go on that subject for hours, but we all have other things to do today. But really, the idea when people say, oh, well, he or she, they are not educated, they really didn't go to college, I argue. I say, some of the most well-read people I've ever known, well-watched persons, well-informed persons, might not have had the privilege of having a formalized agency, academy. But, we can certainly get an awful lot from the whole notion of self-study. I mean, I didn't go to school for architecture, but I can have hours worth of dialogue, especially as it relates to Art Deco and brutalism. I've been studying these categories now since I left Appalachia study. So I really encourage you, all of you, to not only look at what you have to take when you're in school, but to have these diversions where you say, oh, I don't want to spend money on credit courses to have, a self-study of, say, women and gender studies as it relates to. And then you pick it automobiles, whatever it is, subjects, cooking as it relates to economics, whatever. But to always have that fire within you, to learn new subjects and embrace new ideas and to use technology any which way that you can. I think if Shakespeare were alive today, uh, all these wonderful writers, I think they would have just have had such a different experience, not only in mass media, mass marketing, but just to really have fed their own personal soul for themselves. So I wish you a wonderful day. Blessings to you. Always do what is good for you. Be kind to self. And I will chat with you later.